I don't know.
I'm back.
We have everyone.
Yes, we just need a call to order, Deborah.
Okay, it is 5:01. I will call the special meeting to order. The purpose is for an update from the district regarding issues around the COVID-19 closure.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you. We hope tonight just keeps you updated on some of the main topics, and we hope we also have some time. We don't have a lot of new information for you, but I think we'll have plenty of time for questions and perhaps discussion as well. So we did just attach a single slide that has the topics on it just to run through them for you. For our nutrition, our food services, we are up to serving almost 300. We had one day this week where we served almost 300 students. And when you double that, because remember they're getting lunch for the day and breakfast for the next day, that's close to 600 meals being served at our 2 locations. So that continues to be a successful endeavor and is going well. We will not be having food service on the holiday, on the Memorial Day holiday. That's already determined because that's not a school day. And we are also not anticipating continuing food service after school is out after June 19th. But we will make sure to provide all of our families with places where food service will still be available. But it won't be available here on Mercer Island. We just don't have the capacity to do that service. It's not something we've ever offered before. Questions on nutrition or food service?
Yeah, when you say other places that food will be offered, will that be through like different school districts or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. Because there are school districts that have traditionally participated in what's called the federal summer feed program.
Right.
So we'll be able to send that information out.
Okay, great.
Donna, one question. So if it's mandated to us, is there any, so I don't know because during this time, it is a lot of things we're doing that we're not traditionally doing. So if OSPI or the governor's mandate, does that change things?
So it would be a federal mandate because food service is federally funded and mandated. And we would have to put forward the request for the waiver to continue that service. And in speaking with our food service director and the management of Chartwells, they do not anticipate having the capacity, meaning the workers, as well as, frankly, the access to all the food resources over the summer. Some districts are really struggling because they use commodities ongoing. Our food service director has done an amazing job of building a menu that has been based on what she's already had in the freezers and the storage. She made a comment to me earlier this week, something happens to one of the freezers, we're gonna be in a world of hurt. So she's done a really great job of being able to come up with some great menus for our kids without having to tap into the food chain too much. Some, but not as much as others have had that issue of.
Apologies if this already went out and I just missed it, but have we let families know, or will we let them know soon about the alternative places for getting food?
Yeah, we don't know exactly where they are all going to be located yet either. That's a decision that districts will make as they get closer to it. So as soon as we know, we'll pass that information on.
I'm just thinking, I know of some families where both parents are now not able to work. And I know that for some families, they would really like to just know that they will be able to get lunches for their kids in the summers, in the summertime. So even if we don't know the exact locations, if anything we're announcing, if we can just be like, information is coming, that might be
Just
great.
like we'll get out the information that we won't be serving on Memorial Day on the Monday.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yep.
Just on that same note, I imagine we might have some families applying for free and reduced lunch for the first time. I assume all of those instructions are on our website.
Yes, and the window for that does open up at the start of the school year as we get ready to transition into that. So that will be available. Ty, do you have anything else to add? I know you were nodding about it being available on the website.
It is available on the website. Families can also call me directly if they have problems finding it, and I can get them that information. We do verify families at the beginning of the year as part of the process, but at any time during the year, they feel like their circumstances have changed. They are more than welcome to apply, and we can work with them in getting some type of status or some type of agreement put in place. So we don't want any kid to go without food.
But just a reminder, we're serving everyone, right?
Yeah, right now we're serving everyone.
Up is getting a meal, so you don't have to have qualified. And we will continue that through June 19th. Any other questions on food service? Talk a little bit about technology. As of today, we have signed out 535 iPads to families. So, and that's of course is beyond what we already have sent home with our middle and high schoolers. We've also signed out 21 hotspots. We do have more hotspots on order, and surprise, surprise, they're back ordered, but we do have them on and are expecting them here soon. We have 9 more requests for students, and we have staff that are finding that their internet's a little bit unstable, and those hotspots will support their work as well. So more are coming. We have them on order, but as I said, it's one of those real highly coveted items right now. So we hope to have them within the next couple of weeks. Andrews, anything else on that I missed?
No, that was perfect.
All
We'll
right.
have them hopefully by May 10th.
And it's made tomorrow, so not too far away.
Right.
Any questions on that? Childcare is really status quo from when we met last week. It's still, of course, at Boys and Girls Club. Numbers have stayed pretty stable, not a huge difference or any big concerns coming out of Boys and Girls Club for needing more support. So that continues as it has been since we transitioned. And they, of course, are continuing all the protocols that are needed at this time for having childcare. So the temperature checks, the cleaning that is ongoing daily for the health and safety of all the kids and the staff as well. Continuity of learning. This has been our second week. Things appear to be moving forward well. We had some conversation among our students at the high school about the workload, and so the high school staff is they've been looking at their schedule. It seems that the survey of the first week of the schedule was that it was going well, but they are having some discussions around the workload and making sure that it's still appropriate, particularly across the high school. That's where some of the concerns were. Fred, did you have anything else you wanted to update us on from last week?
I would say that the feedback, I think there's a wider span of the type of feedback we're receiving now. Whereas more in the beginning, it was try anything, just do something, and you're not doing enough, and other districts maybe are doing more or whatnot. And it seems like there might still be some aspects of that from community members, but it's starting to really even out, and the real spread is now, wow, what you're doing is engaging. My student is engaging more now than actually they do during the typical school year. This fits their learning style. I was kind of letting my own student manage it. And then once I really dug in, because I was checking in, I realized they were kind of faking it on me. And there's a lot of great stuff here. And now I'm holding them more accountable. And thanks so much for these types of things. And a large piece, and I know that Superintendent Kloster, you're going to get into it a little bit later on, but people starting to wonder, okay, we can sustain this. We see June coming, but what does this look like next year? So the spectrum has widened in terms of feedback, but we're also getting some really positive feedback from students and parents about some of the opportunities that students are getting now. The most poignant feedback is, it's not so much about the quality of the teaching and learning even happening or whatnot, but just having their kid be able to interact with their teacher, interact with other students, interact with something familiar, even though it's in an unfamiliar platform. The teachers and staff who are doing that the most, you hear more about just the fact that they're going above and beyond and reaching out to students, irrespective of how great maybe the learning moment is. Those are some things there. We are starting to work on graduation waivers, and we'll have more information for you next week at the board meeting regarding waivers and graduation, but we're starting to work diligently on our seniors, not just planning, but now actually putting things into motion to help them with graduation. So we've seen an uptick on that in the last couple of days. And so we're now entering that phase, which is normal for every year, where you kind of live in 2 years. You're trying to finish this year and keep everyone focused on the teaching and learning, but you're now really planning for next year. And it's just on steroids this year with the planning for next year, because we don't know as many of the variables. So those are broad updates.
And it's actually 2 weeks for your next regular board meeting. It is scheduled for the 14th is what's on the calendar. So just to keep you up on that. So reopening, as Fred was saying, that's where we are now. And traditionally, for those of us in public school administration, this is the time of the year when we are literally straddling 2 years, because we're looking to next year and finishing out this school year. We are in a much different world of looking to next school year, and have put together a small group to start, just to kind of build some banks of the river around what are all the things we're going to have to even consider. And then we're going to build out that with more groups coming into the conversation. I will say it was a little disheartening, disconcerting in the last superintendent call that I was in with the state superintendent, when he did address this topic, but really just addressed it by saying, be patient. The governor's still looking at 3 to 5 weeks of evidence and data, and seemed to imply that there would be some guidance / regulations to school districts on reopening. In those conversations, it's not a conversation we're talked to, but the next day we always have a debrief as an ESD, and there was a lot of push as how do we as a group of constituents really push hard on that concept of, at one point it was said, well, we might not know till August. We pressed hard back on that and said that is far too late. We need to be able to present to our families before the end of school Definitely plan A, probably plan B and plan C, but we need to have outlined some plans for what is the fall reopening going to look like. So it was a little disconcerting, but we are going to move forward with some of the pieces that we've gathered as resources to support how do we plan for reopening, all the things that we'll need to consider, stepped up health and hygiene measures, washing frequently. Can we do that in all of our schools? Temperature taking. So we'll definitely have our nurses in the conversation early on. What kind of physical distancing parameters will be imposed upon us, and what type will be recommended by public health and or by the CDC? The CDC has put some very broad guidelines out there, not specific. Our understanding is they're going to be wading into this a little bit as well with some more specifics as to numbers, how far do the desks need to be apart. We all kind of have this 6-foot parameter right now. But how many does that mean you can actually put in a classroom? And what other furniture or equipment needs to be moved out to have that physical distancing for students? One piece I was just reading over again today was, you know, in so many of our classes, we want kids to work collaboratively and cooperatively. And so we have these clusters of groups where kids are all facing each other. And we very likely could reopen with our classrooms, having all the desks facing the same direction with large gaps between them. What kind of personal protective equipment will be needed for staff and for students? Those are some of the questions. And who's going to be responsible for providing that? What kind of scheduling will we be looking at? Scheduling for staff, scheduling for students, scheduling for lunch, scheduling for transportation. How do all of those fit into our reopening? How do we meet the needs of the different segments that we have? It's different for our younger students than it is for our older students. And, you know, looking at how some countries are already starting to address this. A lot of information coming out of Denmark, where they're bringing back their younger students first, feeling like the younger students don't do as well in an online platform. So bringing them back first and continuing online learning with their high school age students. Another country, Germany, proposed it differently and brought their high school students back because they wanted to bring them in for their assessment, their spring assessments. So considering all of those different factors and what's going to work well in our setting as we get ready to reopen, calendars fall into that as well. Attendance. This was a big piece in the superintendent's conversation. Is it's great to consider alternative schedules, and for this time period, our attendance monitoring and how we're being funded for attendance has been waived, so to speak. But if we're going to have recommendations to do school differently, to have different schedules, and we're only perhaps going to have 50% of our students in the building at one time, how is OSPI going to allocate our funds? There was a big conversation that Ty and I were in with some other CFOs and superintendents today, where that was a big topic as to how do we make sure that our funding still streams in for the number of students, even if they're there on alternate days. Many of the extracurriculars, as we started to shut them down at the beginning of March, will they be able to be ramped up when we come back? Considering things like first day assemblies with lots of kids all in the same room, sporting events, curriculum nights, all of those pieces that we're so used to having, everyone coming onto campus at the same time, will all have to be scheduled out carefully and really reconsidered as to how can we still serve the need and the purpose that those events have, but in a different manner. Remote learning is going to continue. It's going to continue in probably more than one kind of format. Will it be that students will have at least one day a week when they'll be expected to check in on Schoology or Seesaw and do some remote learning? We also have to be ready that, as you all know and have been reading, the ways and the pathways of what's going to occur as we work through this COVID-19, could we have to have a school shut down again? Just like how this started, where we did not, but other schools in our region had just a single school that had to shut down because of a potential case and having to clean the schools. So we'll be better at that because we now know how to pivot quickly in being able to close the school, get it cleaned, and do what we need to do to get it back open in some way, shape, or form. So remote learning will continue in a lot of different ways. And then I think the main focus that we have to keep at the heart of this reopening, and when we're looking at all the different things that we're going to need to do, is we really need to keep the social, emotional, and practical help for our kids at the heart of it. So that's going to be a big part of the work that we're going to be engaging in with lots of stakeholders. We are looking at some surveys as we move forward as to what is going to be the support for families. How many families are even going to be, I think Director Din had stated at one point, families that will just be, if there's not a vaccine, will still be very, very concerned about having their children come back to school. And so how many families fall into that category, and how do we support those families as well? So we're even doing some research on implementing a what would be considered a traditional homeschool model. So really expanding our ALE. There's lots of applications that we would have to work through for that, but we fully anticipate that there's going to be a desire and need for that kind of model across our system as well. So how do we work through the logistics of that kind of school, and how does it play into the distance learning and the remote learning? That was a lot. Any questions on the reopening?
How are we thinking about changing the calendars? So I think some states are even looking at summer school,
Yeah.
shortening some of the breaks in the middle there once in the fall. Are we looking at those type of things as well, lengthening the school days?
We certainly will, but we do have to always keep some of the parameters in place. So the school calendar for us, and frankly across the state, is one of those bargained pieces when you look at those 180 days. So that's one of the pieces that we are absolutely going to need guidance from OSPI on in this state superintendent's conversation with superintendents this week. There was a lot of confusion around, it doesn't impact us, but it really ramped up a lot of schools that have a very different schedule. And June 19th becomes, it was announced that June 19th was going to be everyone's last day. Like I said, for us, that wasn't a problem, but for many districts that started sooner and were to end sooner, it became really problematic. And they had to readjust that as to, well, then what's the average instructional time that students have to spend in a classroom? And so there was some conversation around that. The question that of course comes from the superintendent is, when it's just said, well, add those 5 days in, the question becomes, who's going to pay for those 5 days? Because a teacher's contract year is so specific, just adding 5 days doesn't work without figuring out how the cost of that will be increased. So that would definitely be something that we would need to be negotiating. Our calendar is already set for the next 2 years. I know Erin's been working on some conversation around the 3rd year out. So changes for this year could have some implications to cost that we'll talk about when we get to the next bullet item, which is about budget.
I have a question, which is, as you're looking forward to potentially, to sort of unknown conditions in the fall, are you guys continuing to evaluate kind of alternative learning platforms and technology, or should we assume that kind of what we've got right now with the grid and Seesaw and so forth, at least on the elementary school level, and Schoology on the higher levels, like that's the model that you'd be using going forward into the fall. Hang on one sec, I have a child. I have to go let my, Suzu, I'm in a meeting, sweetie. Hold on while I go let my kid out because she's accidentally locked in upstairs here.
I don't know if she can still hear us. So I would articulate Maggie Ty's question a little bit different. I think when you refer to Seesaw and Schoology, you're really looking at those learning management systems.
Yes.
And there are ones that are very familiar to us. I'm going to look to Fred to see if he and Learning Services have had any contemplation on looking at other learning management systems as we dive deeper into remote learning.
Absolutely, and Andreeves join in as well. Learning Services, I believe everything is under review. This is active, this is active research happening before our eyes, and I think we have 3 really important stakeholders that we're going to be reaching out to: students, what's their experience been like; parents; and then our staff, and using all of that to come together and really plan forward. I think we can use this opportunity to think about what's working well, what do we not want to change and not touch at all, and then what needs to be tweaked. Later on this month, here in just a couple of weeks, our middle school and our high school will be using the latest version of the Haas survey. You might recall from last year, the High Achieving Schools survey done by Authentic Connections and Sunia Luthar out of Arizona State University. And that was all around, stress and anxiety in high achieving schools. They've revamped it to fit the COVID-19 impact. And so we're going to be administering that from 6th grade through 12th grade to all of our students. It gets a little bit at the usability of what we're doing, but it's really about how are they being affected at a social and emotional level. And so we can think about those data points as well. So there's an academic component that we're thinking about, as well as social and emotional for our students. Andreeves and I have met with several different vendors over the last week and a half who have offered other solutions to us that we could consider, and we are actively trying to meet and connect with different new technologies that are coming out, as well as those that are being refined. I just asked our new transportation director this morning to take a look at a new app that really kind of tracks and monitors students with health better in your system, in your schools, transportation wise, lots of different things. So it's a great question, and it's one that we are studying all aspects of the organization right now in preparation for next year. A component's going to be funding. And how are we going to put all those together? I know Ty and has been keeping his eye on the ball there. But if we need to stop doing something to save the money, that a particular product we might have right now or vendor to pick up a different one, we'll do that, and we can tack in a different direction. Some of our licenses are kind of on a fiscal year of that September to August. Others are not, but we'll work within the parameters we have to improve.
That's great. Thank you for that explanation. I would just really encourage you also to make sure that you reach out to elementary school parents, because I think that especially for the younger kiddos, the ones that don't read yet, or the ones that do read but just can't quite deal with finding their way through the grid, I think a lot of parents are still pretty frustrated. I myself, my daughter does a lot of her homeschool stuff up here at my work desk. This is this week's grid for her for 1st grade. And it's like, it's really hard for her and me to know what she should be doing at a given time, combined with like having to log in to like multiple different sites, and some of the videos aren't working and so forth, and it's just I love the content. As a parent, there's that feedback for me. Like, I'm thrilled with the content, and there's so much on there. It's very rich. Like, we can't get through more than half of it, you know, but what she's really learning a lot. It's going really great, but I can't be like at her side helping her click on the correct thing every 10 minutes, you know, like that's not going to be sustainable. And I just worry for a lot of parents that are trying to juggle work, especially, and multiple kids, that wouldn't be sustainable. So hearing that you guys are working on looking at other ways of possibly delivering this fantastic content is very reassuring. So thank you.
Absolutely. Well, we also have our lived experience as parents, and for me, it's Issaquah, Bellevue, you know, whatever the other districts are, as well as those who have children right here in the Mercer Island School District. And, you know, I can empathize with that as someone who I've just had to block off an hour each day in my calendar, that's my time. I work with my third grader, and my wife and I are dividing and conquering. But yes, it's we're all learning for sure, and you get a good glimpse into your own child's strengths and weaknesses as well. That's for sure.
And your own.
Yeah, well, that, no doubt about that.
And I think, Maggie, Ty, that makes a point in a lot of the research that we've been doing on the reopening of schools is it could very likely look very different for our youngest learners versus our oldest learners, as well as the needs of parents. We know that those with young children have a much greater need for that childcare component that public schools do provide. So those are all considerations that we have to be looking at and making and getting the feedback on from parents as we start to build what reopening is going to look like. Thank you for the feedback.
And Donna, I appreciate that you mentioned childcare, because I think whatever we do, I think that also has to be a foundation of whether what we create is sustainable, because the reality is that our parents may be going back to work, and whether we do a staggered timing or, you know, kids coming at different groups or pods, whatever, but how is that still sustainable to our parents? And whether if the school is not able to manage all the childcare, then how do we have alternatives? But I appreciate the fact that you recognize that and making it really as part of the decision-making moving forward. And it does sound like there's so many things that we have to think about. And I just, before I guess other questions, I want to clarify, Donna, about what you said about OSPI. It sounds like they're saying that don't be so locked into a model. We'll know in July or August. But of course, we have to spend the time to think about it now. So I guess my question is, during this time, you know, OSPI, they give guidance for the whole Washington state, and it's very diverse in its resource capacity and needs. And so I guess I would like to encourage us to shift it a little bit, in that, you know, how do we start thinking of a system that works for Mercer Island, and then advocate to OSPI to accept, you know, the model that we're doing. Because sometimes, you know, when we just wait for them to provide the guidance, they provide us the guidance really for the middle, and that might not be a good fit for our families. So I really, because if we're gonna develop a brand new kind of model for next year, then let's start with thinking about our Mercer Island students and families and teachers to think what is the best model for us. And it may look very, very different than other models, but I guess I wouldn't wait for OSPI to wait until they set guidance, but I would actually encourage us to utilize all of our advocacy tools to encourage them to allow what we do in this time to best serve our students. So that's kind of a shift that I hope that we can start to pull in, you know, our connections and do more advocacy for at least, you know, Mercer Island students and families.
I don't disagree, and it's not that we're going to wait for them and build it after that, but we are part of a state system, and that's how our funding comes. So some of the parameters that we have to abide by are how are they going to send our funding? So if they're going to say, this is how we're going to allocate for attendance, we want to make sure that anything we built that's going to work for Mercer Island also works within that funding system, because we don't want to not have our funding come because we've said this is how we're going to do it, and they come in with, okay, we understand it's not going to be students in seats. So we do have to make sure that we're following the systemness of the statewide system as a public system. I think any banks of the river that they're going to set are going to have some wiggle room in them because they know they have 295 districts. I think the frustration is that we do need to start planning, and we are going to be planning and looking at all the options, but we do have to do it. We're reading as part of our leadership team right now a book called Innovate Inside the Box. And so we are using that phrase a lot as we innovate inside the box, which we know is the regulations and the stipulations that we have to abide by within our statewide system. And the other box that we have to abide by within this reopening of schools is budgetary. So as we consider things like, people might really think, oh, I think it's better for staggered schedules with half days. Might sound really great instead of alternate days, but there's an increased cost to that because you're running more bus routes. So all of those things we have to certainly not throw anything aside, but we have to make sure that it's within the, particularly the parameters of the systemness in our statewide public system, as well as within the parameters of budget, which is our other topic for tonight.
But for example, we could also do things like if we cannot fit all the kids in the elementary schools, use the middle school for elementary schools, assuming you've prioritized attendance of younger students in school for the daycare component, and then move the middle school students to the high school and do more online education for the high school students. So there are many outside the box, I guess, opportunities like that that depend on the priorities that work for Mercer Island. And we kind of have to nail down those priorities, I suppose, and know what we want, and then advocate for the ability to execute upon them.
I think the difficult part right now is there are so many unknowns. I think there's so many unknowns even for parents right now to know what's going to work best for them in the fall. You know, to Maggie Ty's point of having earlier when we were talking about nutrition, where both parents are, you know, now in the unemployed category. So not knowing where you're going to be as a family is scary for folks right now. And we certainly don't want to be adding to that anxiousness and anxiety. But we do want to be planning to support children in education as we reopen in the fall. So we'll be reaching out and definitely getting that stakeholder input as well as considering all the pieces that are going to fit within the systemness that we need to comply with.
I do think there's a lot of structure around school and work, and those are the priorities parents look to.
Yeah. And like kind of add on to David, what you're saying too is, I think regardless of what the governor, even though he might, you know, lift all the bans, you know, still think about what we would be comfortable doing. And I actually, when I think about, you know, a huge chunk of students who might be unstable in their attendance and not attendance, or students who are staying at home, I hope we create a system that works well for all of those students and not have multiple different systems for them. And a system that works for all of it could be, you know, either like a flip system, you know, where, like you said, doing some online, some on class. But I also hear what David is saying is during this time when we're creating new stuff, we really, because I think about how, you know, bargaining is coming up, right? And so I guess I totally understand, Donna, when you say innovation within the box, and there are some federal rules and guidelines, and those are shifting as well, right? But I actually, for next year, we have to make some certain assumptions. And even those assumptions don't come out. But let's say we make certain assumptions that even if we have 20-30% of the people of our students who may not have regular attendance due to whatever, how do we create a system that allows for the flexibility of them to stay at home totally or go half day? And how do we make sure that our teachers, right? Because if we continue within the box, then I am assuming that, let's say we assign traditionally one teacher for every 20 students. And we're still working around that 1:20 ratio. Instead of totally thinking outside and think about how does one teacher, if they do online, they do 30, 40, they work in a group. And then when they come to school, they might do smaller groups. So I guess that's what I hope that we start to think beyond that structure of a certain amount of students and a certain amount of teacher, and then work within that, but allow ourselves to really be creative in how do we make sure that we can sustain the teaching, right? In that if our teachers get sick, then how do they support each other? And and like I said, this conversation, I totally appreciate where the K-12 is, because at the university level, we are thinking about summer and we're thinking about next year as well. And totally re-envisioning of how we teach our classes, and about creating more of teachers who teach 3rd grade or 4th grade teach more on a pod kind of group. And then, but those are things that I encourage us to start thinking about, and not just continue with our framework and try to make, changes within that box, I guess. So there's variation of when you see the riverbanks. I hope that we go really stretch ourselves.
We will, but we do need to keep ourselves within the constraints, certainly of budget, and within the constraints of what our contract language says and what our state regulations and compliance will be. So yes, we are going on those way outside the what ifs, even in the ability to establish an alternative learning education. That's not something Mercer Island has done before. There hasn't been a real desire for that. So in looking at how do we do that for the students who their parents are just very uncomfortable with them coming back to a building. And so those are all things that we are diligently working on and getting the information on, so that we can implement and reopen to meet the needs of all kids, those who don't want to come, those who are ready to come back right away. But how do we do it healthy, safe way that meets the needs of students and staff in a safe way as well?
Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
All right, next topic.
One more thing. I think the kids who cannot come to school will be a very dynamic list. As they do contact tracing and things like that, suddenly a family who's working and other things like that might suddenly decide we need to be quarantined. And so suddenly you've got a child was regularly coming to school who's now out for 2 weeks. And so this falls into, Tam's category of these are sudden things. We can't really have an alternative learning plan that's just suitable for a fixed set of students. It kind of has to be more dynamic, that somehow this child who is suddenly quarantined for 2 weeks can participate in the online group, which might grow from 20 to 25 because there are more kids suddenly having to go work online.
Yeah,
so
you're really
the types of changes.
Yeah, you're really working in a couple of different categories. You're working in the category of those who are choosing the homeschool or the online as their
primary
choice, so to speak, and those who might be having that as a temporary situation. And how do you facilitate that for just those reasons you gave, David, is something that we're going to be investigating as well. So can kids, if you've built the system where, which is very similar to what we're doing with the grids, where it's consistent across the grade level. Here's where we are in our standards right now. Student can relatively fluidly transition to the online for the 2 weeks or 14 days or 3 weeks, depending on what the quarantine time or illness time might be, and be able to transition back to the classroom and still be relatively in the same place with the standards. I've actually seen that work in some systems prior to COVID-19 because they had sort of built this independent learning system that allowed for that fluidity of in and out as students needed it. So definitely another piece that we're investigating and looking at how do we facilitate that within the, the staffing that we currently have. All right, any other questions on? Brian, did I see your hand up now? Okay. Before we do go on to budget, I did want to say that the high school staff is diligently working on collecting information and data on graduation and how to recognize our class of 2020. I know they've been sending out surveys, and I'm getting a weekly update on where they are with that. And even going so far in the questioning of how late is too late to hold something. If we're allowed to have something real life, how late is too late? Because when you start to say, oh, we'll do something in August, a lot of the students say, not interested, not going to do that. So there's no point in planning something in August if no one's going to come. So more information on that as we get it, but we don't have that completely solidified as of yet. So next up is budget. As things have started to settle in and get out of the crisis mode, I realize we're still in an emergency, but we've now gotten the priorities taken care of, and we're looking out to next year. Budget becomes, of course, the next big topic of information. We know that this crisis is going to impact everywhere economically. Here on Mercer Island, the city of Mercer Island has been dramatically impacted economically by the COVID-19 crisis. We've been in conversations, both Ty and I, at our various constituents that provide what guidance they can in these sort of unstable times as to what to expect and what to anticipate. In the state superintendent's conversation on Tuesday, he really talked about that some of the biggest risk for public school districts is passing levies. We are solid through 2022, but I think to Director D'Souza's point that he's brought up more than once, that this is not going to be done in fall of 20. There's very likely it will not be done in fall of 21. And so we're going to be working through this for many years. It's really going to be a situation of basic ed versus non-basic ed, and how do those play out. Yes, there is going to be some CARES Act dollars that will flow through at the state level. Much of that will be specific to the title kind of dollars. So there's requirements and restrictions around how that can be utilized. It will be one-time monies. And so one-time monies is not something that you want to tie any ongoing expenses to. We don't know exactly what that might be able to be used for. Some of the things that were listed from the state superintendent included technology, professional development, potential summer programs or learning programs, particularly around the learning loss concept. So more to come on that as we get more details on what are some potential one-time monies. Again, if it's allocated based on how Title I is allocated, just a reminder to the board that that is a very, not a significant amount of funding for us based on how that's allocated, which is through the free and reduced lunch counts across the nation. So It's not to say that we aren't grateful for every dollar we do get in that area, but it's not a place where we have a lot of money that's carried over. Many districts that have that money are right now penciling out, because there's restrictions on how much you can carry over. And they are absolutely penciling out how much they can carry over for next year to support learning for students next year that are in crisis at the end of this year. That being said, we gave you the update last week on the quarterly budget report, and we had already started to build some declining enrollment, as you will recall, in our 4-year projections. And so we are going to continue with that idea of declining enrollment. We will know more, of course, when we are able to reach out to parents and find out who's planning on returning with us, and also when we get to those October numbers. Some things that Ty and I both conferred on that we heard frequently this week in these budget conversations from all constituents is this is going to look different than the last downturn, but we have to prepare as much as we can. And so the standard advice is shore up your fund balance, your reserves, as best as you can. That's exactly what they're for in this time, is that economic uncertainty. So we don't have a lot of savings that are coming due to the closures. All of our staffing expenses, 85% of our budget is spent on staffing, are still encumbered and are expected to be paid out. We do have some small savings. Substitutes, as an example, of course, was budgeted out for the entire year, and we're not expending those dollars at this time. Utilities perhaps are a little bit less. I'm looking at Tony to see how we're doing there, especially this time of year. So that's something that we might have some savings on. Travel and conference, of course, has all been suspended, so there's some savings there. So we are just being really cognizant of making sure that we're doing everything we can to have as solid as a fund balance as we can moving forward, certainly past 2020, 2021 into the subsequent years out, not knowing what is going to happen with our state budgets. There's some talk of the legislature coming back in June, and what decisions could potentially come out of that. Some things that I have implemented in the immediate time frame is, again, suspending all travel and conference. There is no overtime approval. If there is any overtime, it has to be pre-approved by me. So that is something that we did have some overtime is when we went into the crisis, particularly for our custodial staff with the constant cleaning, but that is all not having to occur right now, and there is no space for overtime for the rest of this school year. And we've titled it a hiring freeze. It doesn't mean that we're not going to hire, but every vacant position, every position that is attrited by a resignation or a retirement is being very closely analyzed to look at the funding sources for that. Do we need it at the same fulfillment level that it was at? It is a slow and meticulous process, and our leadership team, who of course are the ones who are looking for those hirings as they plan for next year, are being very patient, and I am thankful to them for being patient as we work through every single position to say, do we need this at the level it's at? Can we bring this position in at a different level to assume some savings? Budget questions.
I have kind of a little bit of a question, but also wanted to talk about just the cycle of the budget, because it's an ongoing thing that happens all around the year. So we've got May and June where you're really kind of buttoning up your budget plans. And then we have until August 31st to approve it as a board legally. And July is not typically a month in which we work as a board. So we might want to be looking at that as well. But so really, we're coming into the home stretch on next year's budget right now. Is there any indication that there'll be some extensions or some leeway in that budgeting cycle this year, or we're set for August 31st?
Yeah, you see us both shaking our heads. That has not been any part of the conversation. Hi?
It's within statute, so they would have to modify the WACs and RCWs to make that happen. Not likely. As far as I've heard, we are still on schedule. So.
Well, I'm glad you have a really good crystal ball.
Will we be told of any potential budget cuts or anything? I mean, clearly sales tax revenue, B&O taxes, everything is to the state is down. When is there any timeline for being informed of any budget cuts?
At this point, no. This is one of the presentation from WASBO yesterday had a big slide with a list of a whole bunch of different questions that was titled unanswered questions. And the very first one was a special session for the legislature. There's all kinds of rumors flying around that the legislature might be called back in June or July to make revisions to the budget. We don't know. There's also concerns about the constitutional protection of our funding sources. McCleary said that it is the state's paramount duty to provide for education, but that's basic education is what is defined by the legislature and by the state. So if they decide to make changes to the model, which they did back in the 2009 to 2013 timeframe, we could be looking at modifications. If there are changes to our funding streams or funding sources, of course, we will bring it to you and let you know immediately as soon as we hear it. Especially as we get closer to the deadline for the approval of the budget, any change to next year's funding is going to make a significant impact, and we will have to be very quick to respond to that and how we adjust our plans.
So we won't get anything by the end of May, June timeframe, which is typically when we have to make our hiring determinations, right?
Exactly.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Ty.
No, I was just going to say, as of now, what we've heard is that things are moving forward as they've been approved in this last budget go around within the legislature, with the exception of what the governor vetoed. So the additional counselors, some transportation funding, and a few other pockets here and there. But by and large, the main funding model is as it was approved.
We did have a budget cut in the 2007, 2008 timeframe. So it's not it's happened in our lifetimes, clearly,
Yeah.
within the education window of our kids as well.
Yes, and there is a long list of things that was modified within the first few years of the recession, the Great Recession, in terms of the state rolling back the COLA increases, the cost of living adjustments. They actually reduced the salary capacity. They modified the K-3 compliance ratios and timelines and funding. They modified, what was it? The Running Start FTE funding models. So there was a significant change in just about most of the parts of the prototypical model. So the information that we have now says that the model is going to stay as it is. We will get the funding that's been established within this last session. We can go ahead. And frankly, using that information, that's what we have now. That's what we need to do. And we can make assumptions about what our enrollment is going to look like. We can be conservative about enrollment, but to make assumptions about funding changes could lead us down some paths that
Yeah, they're very hard to justify. I
very hard to
agree.
justify.
You know, any picking and choosing between different opportunities here is, it seems very arbitrary. I'd believe. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's helpful.
I appreciate really hearing more about the budget in this sense for me to learn where things are coming from and then the cycle, and it helps kind of put everything, you know, all the pieces are coming together. And so one of you said about basic education. That makes me think then, so basic education, everything else is extra. So does it mean things like the extra engineering class, the extra math class, are those extras beyond basic education? And I guess I want to, even though it's kind of opening a can of worms, I know it's just, we have to think about it, because if those things doesn't happen, then what are our funding sources? You know, as we, are we able to, you know, is that where the foundation comes in to help us? Is that time that we ask for more support from the community? Is that, so I guess, you know, for me, longer term, how do we start thinking about those kind of things? And I guess I'm just throwing this out to also my board member, your directors. Think about, in the past, have we worked with the city council to strategize? Because right now it seems like everything is, you know, is all mashed up in a pot. And we don't know how we're moving, you know, we're creating together a new system, education, health, you know, civic, all these needs for Mercer Island. And so we're putting out all these bonds and levies. And in the past, have we worked closely with the council to figure out how we move forward together and be strategic on when things get laid out and who asks for what? Because in the end, right, it's all still serving the same individual. So, because I'm thinking about the counselors that we're missing right now. So is that something we pick up? Is it something they pick up? And so I'm still learning all those kind of things, but I hope that during this time that our board, you know, work together closely with the council to move together as a team to really help, I think, our community to understand the rationale on how do we start to rebuild the infrastructure for Mercer Island.
I'm not sure if that was a question to the superintendent or.
No, I guess it was a question for my, you know, board directors, colleagues who've been here longer, like what has been kind of our relationship with council? Has that happened in the past? Is it a good idea, bad idea? I don't, just your thoughts.
So we've had some big news in the last couple of days, and I know Donna sent out the press release that the city's made major cutbacks, and that includes 2 of our elementary school mental health counselors, and as well as hours of the remaining mental health counselors through YFS. I mean, basically YFS and Park and Rec have been pretty decimated. This is, I don't want to say it's just the beginning. It's just the beginning in terms of it's just happening. So we don't have this on the agenda today to talk about specifics, but I did want to run this by our board and see if this is something we want to put on the agenda for our next meeting. Probably the 14th. I don't think we need to necessarily do it at our special meeting next week, assuming we have one. As
we don't have one scheduled, that would be at the pleasure of the board if you'd like to do one next
right week. And, you know, I mean, we think that things are going to calm down and then something else happens. So, you know, I think I'm okay waiting until like the beginning of next week to decide if we're going to do a special meeting. But those are 2 questions. Is number 1, what's the comfort level in terms of wanting a special meeting for next week? And it would be on updates regarding COVID, like we've been doing when it hasn't been formal board meetings. And then basically what I've been thinking, and certainly am open to other proposals. I spoke with Mayor Wong today, and he's also going to have a similar discussion with council. This is impacting us, and so we don't necessarily work with the council, but we certainly we all work for the community. And so figuring out the best way to proceed, if I don't want to propose solutions, but I guess the question is, do we want to form a committee? Do we want to have a discussion on whether or not to form a committee of the board in order to have these more difficult conversations with city council members? So we can't make any decisions today. We can't take any action, but I'm just looking for like thumbs up, thumbs down in terms of whether or not we want to have a discussion at our next meeting on possibly, one suggestion would be creating a committee. If someone has other ideas, at that time we can discuss those. But we all know, and Donna and Ty's, favorite saying, which I think is really based in reality, is, if mental health counselors in our schools is a priority for all of us, then it will happen at the expense of other programs. And we'll make it happen for the benefit of our kids. But that's at the expense, and that's a decision that we need to make both as a board and as a leadership team and as the community. So I think we need to understand that all of our interlocal agreements with the city are being tremendously affected, and we need to figure out exactly what those are and decide ways that we're going to move forward. So I'm just looking for a thumbs up, thumbs down in terms of putting that on the agenda to have a more meaningful discussion. Yeah, okay, so I'm seeing thumbs up or greens from everybody. And then also, in the 2 weeks, it will give us just kind of time to flush some of this out. I know Ty and Donna have been working on this throughout, kind of anticipating a lot of this. The issue, I just want to say in terms of, from what I've been hearing, and I know, Brian, you were at the meeting, but the WASDM update, I don't know who else was, you just can't see, but I know Brian typed in a question. In terms of, Tim was talking about that they're not really getting straight answers in terms of basic education funding. With McCleary, it does seem to be more settled. The basic education will be fully funded and can't be cut. But as Tam said, basic education is basic education, and we go so far beyond that it's good to know that threshold is there. But what's going to impact us, probably what we're going to feel much more, is the ability of the city and the state to collect property taxes for the rest of our funding through the levy capacity and things like that. So if they're not collecting it, we don't know that the state has an obligation to provide it to us. So there's just a lot of unknowns, and I don't like to worry. I mean, we plan for them, but the what if game isn't particularly helpful. But I think we do need to figure out priorities, and knowing some of the things that we could be making some difficult choices on, to have the time to really think those through before we have to make them, and get some feedback would be beneficial for all of us.
So if I could just add in real quickly, President Murray, the policy that was last year just updated is 1006. That one addresses City Council School Board Partnership Committee. And so that would be the policy that could be added to the May 14th agenda for discussion and potential action based on the thumbs up consensus, just to give a little clarity to that. And to your point, Deborah, on the property tax collection, remember Ty said last week we're fine for June. It's those outlying ones that become problematic. And just because we're talking about Mercer Island City and the devastating cuts that they've had to make, this isn't just happening in the city of Mercer Island. I spoke with the city manager today, and this is occurring all around us. The cities, the local municipalities were in no way, shape, or form carved out in any of the federal dollars that will be flowing in this emergency. State has made some statements, but again, they're just unsure of what kind of future funding they will have available. There's conversations around the property tax non-payment rates of being anywhere from 3 to 10% in communities over the next year. And so that is something that will be problematic for everyone if those rates come out as high as they do. So hate to be the purveyor of all the gloom and doom, but there are things that we need to be thinking about as we plan for future, and really looking at, you know, what is central to our mission. And then I want to share some happy news. Next week.
It looks like Brian has a question.
Oh, sorry, Brian.
Thank you. Sorry, just before we step out of that, I just wanted to comment just briefly that, so I've said it before, and so I think it bears repeating. Every inequity or systemic shortfall that we have through all systems in our government and our communities are going to be magnified and amplified by this experience. And so as we're looking at food, access to food, as we're looking at childcare, as we're looking at education, as we're looking at mental health services, youth and family services, all of these things, these are all systems that were already under immense pressure and stress. And so as these budgets begin tightening up, we're going to see these systems start to fall apart. And so I think it is important to have those conversations as to what can the district do, what can the city do, what are those interlocal agreements. But we also, I think, should recognize that school districts, public school systems, have been asked to carry an extraordinary burden for a very long time of being the hub for access to healthcare, access to food, access to childcare, all of these things that are beyond what we do, which is to educate. And so we certainly want to continue to carry that burden as much as we can, but we also look to the city and the county and other systems to be able to take up their share as well. So the last thought of that is something that's been said for a long time, is Mercer Island School District is very fortunate that we can do just about anything we want to do. The thing is, we can't do it all. And so as we contemplate as a board what we may ask of our superintendent to do and how we begin prioritizing or setting boundaries in the sandbox, I think we need to be very careful that there is a limited amount of money and resources that can be used in a sustainable way to project into the future. And so we need to be very careful about how we ask for those adjustments in programming, in budgets, and all of that, to ensure that we're not unintentionally doing damage to another part of the system that we're not seeing at the moment or unaware of. So I just want to put that out there. Thank you.
I think in relation to what Brian just mentioned, I believe in the 2007-2008 timeframe, they looked at school districts' fund balance and withheld revenue based on the size of their fund balance. So it's one way of reducing funding to a school district in a non-impactful, at least in the numbers way, because they assumed the fund balance was not going to be utilized, even though it was a safety cushion for things like this. And by withholding money based on what's in your fund balance, the state was able to reallocate that money at the state level for state priorities. So yeah, I think a school district's budget and balance sheet is very fungible and could be on quicksand in many different ways. So we have to be careful about how we allocate our money.
And I think to that point, you know, in my conversation with Jesse Bond, city manager today, in talking about things like utilizing one-time resources, i.e. donations for ongoing costs. That's been a big part of the problem for Youth and Family Services. They have a fabulous foundation who does marvelous work, but depending on that and the thrift store, who would have thought it would be closed for this long of a time period in this crisis, is really what has collapsed that system. And to the Park and Rec department, so much of their revenue comes from the community center and the parks facility use and all of that, because it has just completely collapsed. So that's that doesn't even include the sales tax and the non-payment of property taxes impacting them. So lots to navigate through moving forward. Before we close, can I just share a couple of positives? Tomorrow is National Food Service Worker Day. So if you happen to be out for something is essential and you happen to even just drive by, please honk your horn and smile and wave at our food service workers. They are doing such an incredible job at the two places where we're distributing food. So we'll make sure we get some pictures out on social media. I think there might be some superhero capes or something in the mix for tomorrow. And then also looking forward to May, which starts tomorrow. Next week is Teacher Appreciation Week. And we are thinking that we're going to have Staff Appreciation Month for May, because we are certainly appreciative how much everyone has pivoted and changed. And along those lines, as you all know, May is always kind of our staff recognition month. We do a lot around recognizing our employees of the year. And so in light of where we are in this crisis, we are not going to have individual employees of the year this year. We are going to have Mercer Island School District staff as employees of the year. So you're going to see lots of hashtags and some social media things going out as we honor every single one of our employees for the month of May. Still going to recognize our retirees. We will do those at our final meeting in May, albeit probably virtually, but we do want to recognize our retirees who have already decided to go off into the next chapter. And that's all I have on my list, Deborah.
I just wanted to add to that I listened in for part of the PTA meeting for Island Park this morning, and some of the room parents were planning virtual ways to recognize the teachers. So some of that is going to be happening, and they in particular were, and Principal Hoffman was in particular suggesting that notes would be very much appreciated, notes from parents and notes from the students, or cards, even if it's only in a virtual format. That's something that they would appreciate, since everyone's working so hard right now.
We're going to start a hashtag campaign starting next week of thank MI educators, thank my educators. And so we'll be sending out information on that as well for community members to join in, and then post those periodically for our staff to see.
I might also throw in there, simply because I used to wear a hat of the PTA, that National PTA has a toolkit available that they offer every year with themed Zoom filters and frames and cards and certificates and all sorts of great digital banners that you can download for free to say thank you to staff and to our teachers. So that's at National PTA.
Thanks.
And I just want to, I've been seeing the reminders about excuse me, the Zoom meeting with the counselors and administrators. I believe it's Monday, right? So it's before. Does someone who knows can phrase that a little bit better than I just did want to announce that?
That's the first of our fireside chats will be Monday, May 4th. This one is centered, Fred has done a tremendous job of getting some admissions officers from some universities who will be on the Zoom call as well. And so we'll be having a conversation around admissions, particularly in light of this COVID-19 crisis and how that will impact students and what will the adjustments being made.
And then we've also added on, it's expanded a little bit because we'll actually have a kindergarten teacher, a 5th grade teacher, school counselor, middle school principal, and high school staff as well, talking about trying to help parents and teachers or students understand the question that's on everyone's mind: am I behind? Will my child be behind? And so we're going to have that directed as well. So it's both, will we behind? How will we, or will we even be behind in the fall? And how can we help to calm people's, noticeable and rightful urgency and worrisome about that. So there'll be a full panel. It should be a good evening. That is going to start at 5 o'clock on Monday nights, and we have a Zoom link that we're sending out and is available.
Great, looking forward to that. I know there's also a parenting, I believe it's sponsored by the JCC, for parents of I think it's geared towards younger people, but has some parenting experts to talk to parents and give advice on parenting resources and dealing with behavioral challenges in this time. So I believe that's after this time-wise. Any other quick announcements? We don't really technically have board reports, but certainly if people know of things that are happening and think it's good for others to know. I'm not seeing anyone jumping in.
I might add that small thing, just because I'm part of the 5th grade events team through the PTA at Westminster Elementary School. And so I know that those teams are continuing to work. I think sweatshirts are beginning to be sent out. That's a tradition that continues. We've got kindergartners who are moving on up, and we want to celebrate them. 5th graders who are moving on up to middle school, middle schoolers moving on up to the high school. So as we think about graduation and promotion and all those things, keep those kids in mind. And I know that those teams are working really hard to make this transition special for those kiddos as well.
I was asked at Rotary meeting, they asked me to talk about what we were doing in this COVID-19 crisis. And I was asked the question, how to support our students who are transitioning. So definitely our seniors, but as well as our 8th graders. And my response was, support the grad-grams that come out through the PTA Council, because kids love those, they love getting them, and they're still doing them. So if anyone can sponsor our students with grad-grams, that's always greatly appreciated, especially in this time.
And the Spring for Schools campaign is up and live.
Yeah.
Fred?
Sorry, one other piece. On Tuesday night, the instructional or the mathematics adoption team from Islander Middle School will be presenting to the IMC their recommendation, which if it goes through IMC at your next board meeting is when the first reading would be on math. We also have community forum events via Zoom that we will be holding as well to gather more input. The committee was made up of parents, teachers, and administrators, but just want to put that on your radar as a board because one of your responsibilities is approving core curriculum. So we'll be bringing that forward, and that impacts some 5th graders who are on accelerated math tracks all the way through 8th grade. So just a heads up on that.
Great.
And he just saved me writing all that in the update to you.
Excellent. All right. unless I see someone jumping up and down, looks like we have concluded. It is 6:25. Thank you so much for all of the updates, the hard work. We know it will continue. Brian is saying thank you. I think I can speak on behalf of all of us. A big thank you. It's tough, ongoing work, and we know it's continuing. So thank you for all of that. And we will all be in touch soon. Oh, and then just want to make sure in terms of, is everyone, just give me a head nod or a shake. Is it okay if we kind of delay till Monday or Tuesday of next week to decide if we need to have a special meeting Thursday? Okay, so we will let you all know if things are running smoothly. We could maybe take a week off. If not, then we will meet and get updates, but that it will be noticed as required. So, all right, 6:25 and we are adjourned. Thank you so much, everyone.